The microphone went dead before the old man finished his first sentence. He stood at the podium on the courthouse steps, 81 years old, his American Legion cap set perfectly level on his white head, his dress uniform pressed with the kind of care that takes an hour and a trembling hand. 300 people filled the square below him. The high school band had just finished. The mayor had given his remarks and stepped aside. And now Harold Dempsey, who had served 2 tours in Korea and come home to build a hardware store and raise 4 children and bury 1 wife and outlast 2 decades of medical trouble, stood at the microphone to deliver the Veterans Day address he had been asked to give 6 weeks earlier. He said his name. He said he was grateful to be standing here. He thanked the town of Carlisle Bend for 47 years of belonging to it. Then the microphone cut out. Not a feedback squeal, not a technical flutter. The sound simply stopped, as if someone had reached for a switch and turned it off with purpose. The crowd shifted. A murmur ran through the rows of folding chairs. Harold Dempsey looked down at the microphone, then back up at the people watching him, and his jaw tightened, the way a man's jaw tightens when he has been embarrassed in public and is deciding whether to show it. He decided not to show it. He opened his mouth and tried to continue without amplification, his voice thin in the open air, swallowed by the November wind. 3 rows back, a man in a green wool coat leaned toward a woman beside him and said something. She laughed. It was not a kind laugh. 2 rows behind them, a German shepherd went still. If this story stays with you, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and watch until the very end. Gunnery Sergeant Donovan Marsh had been sitting in the 7th row for 20 minutes, trying to be invisible. He was 39 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, 215 pounds of lean muscle and scar tissue, with dark hair cut close at the sides and gray beginning to show at the temples. His face was angular and weathered, the jaw set in a permanent posture of assessed readiness, the eyes a pale gray-green that moved constantly, cataloging doorways and sight lines and the body language of strangers, the way a man catalogs these things when he has spent enough years in places where noticing the wrong thing too late gets someone killed. There was a scar along his left jaw from Helmand Province, faded to a thin silver line, and another across the back of his right hand that he had stopped explaining. He wore civilian clothes, a charcoal wool jacket and dark trousers because this was supposed to be a quiet morning. He had driven 4 hours from Fort Beaumont to attend this parade because Carlisle Bend was the town where his grandfather had lived and died. And the Veterans Day parade here felt like the right kind of obligation for a man who had too few of those left. Beside him sat Kodiak. The dog was a German shepherd, 7 years old, 89 pounds of tan and black muscle and discipline, with amber eyes that missed nothing and ears that moved like satellite dishes tracking soft signals. He wore a plain dark collar and a working dog vest, olive green, fitted clean against his broad chest. His coat was dense and well kept, the saddle pattern deep black fading to rich tan along his flanks and face. He had a single white mark above his right eye, small as a thumbprint, the one asymmetry in an otherwise precise animal. He did not bark. He did not pull. He sat pressed against Donovan's left leg with the particular stillness of a dog trained to hold himself in reserve until the moment his reserve is needed. And the moment he went still in a different way, a sharper way, his ears angling forward, and his weight shifting almost imperceptibly toward the courthouse steps, Donovan stopped watching the podium and started watching the crowd. The man in the green wool coat leaned over again. The woman laughed again. A second man, 2 seats to their left, pulled out a phone and appeared to be recording something, though not the podium. Harold Dempsey had stopped trying to project his voice. He stood at the dead microphone with his hands folded in front of him and his eyes on the crowd, patient and dignified in the way of men who have long since made peace with the fact that dignity is the one thing nobody can take from you without your permission. Donovan was on his feet before he consciously decided to stand. Kodiak moved with him, one smooth rise from sitting to moving. No hesitation, no command required. They walked forward along the outside edge of the row, past the folding chairs and the ribbon barriers, up the 3 steps to the courthouse portico, and Donovan stopped beside Harold Dempsey at the podium. He looked out at the crowd, 300 faces, some curious, some confused, some pretending not to notice what had just happened. He said in a voice that carried without effort, the voice of a man accustomed to being heard in loud and difficult places. Gunnery Sergeant Donovan Marsh, United States Marine Corps. This man has something to say, and I'm going to make sure the rest of you hear it. He turned to Harold Dempsey and said quietly, "Go ahead, sir." Harold Dempsey looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were pale blue, reddened at the rims from the November cold, and they held the particular expression of someone who has been given a gift they were not expecting and have not yet decided they deserve. "You don't have to do this," Harold said. "I know," Donovan said. Harold Dempsey turned back to the microphone that no longer worked, and he began again, and Donovan Marsh stood 4 inches to his right, facing the crowd, and projected every word. What happened in the next 40 minutes changed both of them in ways neither of them would understand until much later, when the cold had settled in earnest over Carlisle Bend, and the parade ribbons had long since blown off the lampposts, and the town had moved on to the season of indoor lives and closed curtains, except for the 2 of them and the dog who had decided, somewhere between the courthouse steps and the first real conversation of their lives, that this was where they were supposed to be. Harold Dempsey was 81 years old, 5 feet 9, and diminished some from a lifetime of physical work that had thickened him once, and age was now slowly narrowing him back. He had a full head of white hair, brushed and combed with the care of a man who still believed presentation mattered, and a face that had been broad and square in his working years and now showed the architecture of that squareness softened by time. The cheeks a little hollow, the jaw still set, the brow still clear. His hands were the most honest part of him. They were the hands of a hardware man who had spent 47 years handling the physical problems of other people's homes, large and scored with calluses, and the particular damage that comes from decades of honest grip. He had been a corporal in the United States Army, 7th Infantry Division, and he had come home from the Punch Bowl in 1953 with a Purple Heart and a preference for not talking about it that had lasted almost 7 decades. After the ceremony, after the crowd dispersed and the high school band loaded its instruments, and the mayor retreated to his warm office and the folding chairs were stacked and hauled away, Harold Dempsey stood on the courthouse steps in the thinning cold air. Donovan returned from briefly walking Kodiak along the grass border of the square, and Harold was still there, waiting. "Buy you a cup of coffee," Harold said. It was not quite a question. Donovan looked at him. Kodiak looked at him. The dog's ears were relaxed, angled slightly outward, and he leaned forward and pressed his broad head briefly against Harold's hand, unprompted and precise. Harold's expression shifted. Something moved across it that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but something between them. "He doesn't usually do that," Donovan said. "He's a good judge," Harold said. They went to the Millwright Cafe on the corner of Sycamore and 3rd, which had been in Carlisle Bend since Donovan was a child visiting his grandfather, and which still smelled of the same combination of burned coffee and maple syrup and old wood that he remembered. Donovan tied Kodiak's lead loosely to the iron ring outside the front window, where the dog could see them through the glass and they could see him, and the woman behind the counter, Patrice, who appeared to be in her late 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses pushed to the top of her head, looked at the dog and said she didn't mind if he came inside. Donovan said he was fine where he was, and Patrice nodded with the particular approval of someone who has watched too many people misread a well-trained animal. Harold wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the window. "That man in the green coat," he said. "You know who he is?" "No," Donovan said. "His name is Derek Voss. He's on the town council." Harold paused. "He's also the one who suggested my remarks be cut from the program." Donovan set his own cup down. "Suggested or arranged?" Harold smiled, and the smile had something tired and precise in it. "That's the right question," he said. The story came out in pieces over the next 40 minutes, and Donovan had the patience for it that years of intelligence work had built in him, the ability to receive information without pushing on it. Harold had been asked 6 weeks ago to give the Veterans Day address by the previous mayor, a man named Gerald Hollins, who had died of a heart attack in late September, 3 weeks before the election that replaced him. The new mayor, Stephen Price, had inherited the program and had not canceled Harold's invitation, but had communicated through a deputy that Harold's remarks should be kept brief and should avoid anything political. Harold had not planned to say anything political. He had planned to talk about the men he served with, 3 of whom were buried in Carlisle Bend's municipal cemetery, not 6 blocks from where they were sitting, and about what he believed the day was actually for. Derek Voss had been on the stage for the mayor's introduction, and the microphone had stopped working approximately 9 seconds after Harold began speaking, while Voss was standing near the sound panel. Donovan absorbed this. He looked out the window at Kodiak, who was watching a woman walk past with 2 small children. His posture relaxed, interested, but not agitated. "Is there anything else?" Donovan asked. Harold looked at him with the steady gaze of a man deciding how much to say. "There's something going on with the Veterans Memorial," he said finally, "in Riverside Park. The one the American Legion put up in 1971. There are plans moving through the council to relocate it, to make room for a development project on the park's east end. Voss has a personal investment in the development company. Most people in town don't know that yet." Harold paused. "The ones who are trying to find out have been running into walls." Donovan was quiet for a moment. Outside, a light, cold rain had begun, the kind that doesn't decide whether to become something more, and the street glistened under the gray sky. "How long have you been trying to find out?" he asked. Harold set his cup down carefully. 3 months, he said. "Since July, when the first rezoning notice came through. My friend Robert Achebe. He was a veteran too, Navy. He filed a public records request for the development contract. It came back redacted. 18 pages, most of them blacked out." Donovan picked up his coffee. He looked at Harold Dempsey's hands on the table, the hardware store hands, and he thought about a man spending 3 months pushing against a wall that kept smoothly not moving. "Tell me about the memorial," he said. Harold told him. The memorial in Riverside Park was a granite structure, 12 feet high, installed in 1971 by American Legion Post 44 in honor of the 43 men from Carlisle Bend who had died in service since the Second World War. The names were cut into the stone. 3 of them were men Harold had known personally. One of them, a kid named James Aldridge, who had grown up 3 houses down from Harold on Maple Street and who had died in Vietnam at 22, had been Harold's wife's nephew. The structure had been rededicated in 2002 and again in 2009. It sat on a concrete pad in a portion of Riverside Park designated as a Veterans Memorial Site by a town ordinance passed in 1970. The development project proposed a mixed-use commercial center on the east end of the parks. The relocation plan proposed moving the memorial to a smaller plot near the park's maintenance entrance, behind a public works facility. "Behind a maintenance building," Donovan said. "Behind it," Harold said. Donovan did not say anything for a moment. He watched the rain hitting the window. He had come to Carlisle Bend for a morning. He had driven 4 hours to sit in a folding chair and watch a parade, and then drive home. He had a return to Fort Beaumont scheduled for the following morning. He had work. He had the particular structured emptiness of a professional soldier's off-duty hours, the kind of life that runs on schedule and duty, because those are the armatures that hold a man upright when the other structures have come apart. He had not planned to stay. "Where are you parked?" he said. Harold looked at him. 2 blocks east," he said. "I'll walk you to your car," Donovan said. They left the cafe, and Kodiak fell into place at Donovan's left side without being asked, matching his pace exactly. And Harold Dempsey watched the dog for a moment, and then looked at Donovan and said, "You were here before, weren't you? Years ago." "My grandfather," Donovan said. "He lived here for the last 8 years of his life. He died in 2017. "What was his name?" "Frank Marsh," Donovan said. Harold stopped walking. He turned and looked at Donovan with an expression that had shifted from curiosity to something older and more specific. "Frank Marsh," Harold said. "He used to come to the Legion Post. On the first Monday of the month, he always brought a coffee cake from that bakery on 5th Street. "That sounds right," Donovan said. Harold was quiet for a moment. The rain had strengthened slightly, running in thin lines down the lampposts and making the old brick sidewalk dark. "He talked about you," Harold said. "A grandson in the Marines. He was very proud." That hit Donovan harder than he expected. He had spent 2 years after his grandfather's death telling himself the grief was manageable, stored, filed in the correct place. He had not expected to walk into it here, on a wet sidewalk in Carlisle Bend, delivered by an 81-year-old man he had known for less than 2 hours. Kodiak pressed against his left leg once, briefly, and held there. "He was a good man," Donovan said. He was surprised by how flat his own voice came out. "He was," Harold said. "He used to say the town owed more than it paid. I didn't understand what he meant at the time." He paused. "I think I understand it better now." They walked the 2 blocks to Harold's car. Harold reached for his keys and then turned back. "There's a meeting Thursday evening," he said. "The American Legion Post. 7 o'clock. I'd be glad of your company, if you're willing." Donovan looked at him. He thought about the drive back to Fort Beaumont. He thought about his empty schedule for the week, the kind of empty that accumulated when you were between deployments and the work was administrative and the days had a way of resembling each other. "What would I bring?" he said. "Just yourself," Harold said. "And him, if he's welcome." He nodded at Kodiak. Kodiak looked up at Harold, and his tail moved once, a single measured arc. Donovan called Fort Beaumont that afternoon and extended his leave by 4 days. He found a room at the Millwright Inn on Sycamore Street, which turned out to be owned by Patrice, who ran both businesses with the same brisk competence, and who said the dog was welcome in the ground-floor room as long as he didn't bother the cat, who had run of the garden and whose name was Sergeant Major. Kodiak investigated this situation with professional courtesy, and thereafter ignored it. The Thursday meeting of American Legion Post 44 was held in the basement room of a building on Harrison and 4th that had been a bank in 1947 and a barber shop in 1963, and an American Legion post since 1969. The room held 32 chairs, and 29 of them were filled. Donovan arrived with Harold at 6:45 and sat in the back row with Kodiak at his feet, and he spent the first 10 minutes cataloging the people in the room the way he cataloged all rooms. The men and women here ranged from their mid-40s to their mid-80s. Several wore Legion or VFW caps. One woman in her early 70s, introduced as Vera Tillman, kept a manila folder on her lap and a pen behind her ear, and had the expression of someone who had been compiling evidence for longer than she had any enthusiasm left for the task. She was a Navy veteran, Harold told Donovan quietly, and a retired county assessor. She understood documents. After the formal items, the meeting shifted to the memorial, and Vera Tillman opened her folder and began to speak. What she laid out was methodical and specific. The development company behind the Riverside Park project was registered in the state as Meridian Holdings, LLC, incorporated 14 months ago. The listed principals included two names that meant nothing to most people in the room. The third name, listed as a silent investor, had been redacted from the public filings but had appeared in documents Vera obtained through a Freedom of Information request to the county assessor's office, which she had filed as a private citizen after leaving her position there, and which had taken 11 weeks to return. Derek Voss held a 23% interest in Meridian Holdings, LLC. Derek Voss was also the council member who had introduced the motion to rezone the east section of Riverside Park. He had not disclosed his financial interest in the development company at any point during the council's deliberations. The room was quiet when Vera finished, not the uncomfortable quiet of people avoiding something, but the weighted quiet of people who had suspected something and were now sitting with the confirmation of it. Robert Achebe, who was in his late 60s and had the bearing of a Navy veteran, said from the third row, "What does the ordinance say?" Vera said the 1970 ordinance establishing the Veterans Memorial Site required a 2/3 vote of the full town council to alter the memorial's location, additionally a 60-day public comment period, and additionally sign-off from the State Veterans Affairs Office. None of these had been initiated because the rezoning had been structured as a commercial variance rather than a memorial relocation, a legal framing Vera described as creative. "Creative," said a man named Thomas Boyle from the second row, who was 74 and had one arm from an encounter in the Mekong Delta in 1969, and the way he said the word made it mean something other than a compliment. Donovan spoke now. "The redacted contract," he said. "The one Robert filed for. Is there a copy in the chain that wasn't fully redacted? The original request? The response? The appeal?" Vera checked her folder. There was an appeal. It came back with the same redactions and a note citing commercial confidentiality. Signed by a deputy administrator, city clerk's office, a woman named Sandra Purcell. "Is Sandra Purcell still in that position?" "She retired," Harold said, "in August." Donovan nodded slowly. He looked at the floor, where Kodiak had stretched out in a patient heap, his chin on his paws, one ear canted in the direction of the conversation. "The development project. Is there a public presentation scheduled? A council open session where it goes to a vote?" Vera said, "December 9th, 4 weeks from now." Donovan said, "Then you have 4 weeks." The meeting ran another hour and a half. By the end of it, a working group had formed. Vera and Robert and Harold and 2 others, Cecily Marsh, who ran the community newspaper, and a younger man named Patrick Aller, who was 36, an Army veteran who had worked in commercial real estate and understood variance applications. Donovan was not on the working group because he was not a resident of Carlisle Bend and had no formal standing, but he sat in the room while the group formed, and he offered what he knew about document preservation and chain of custody, and the specific ways that institutional pressure tended to create records of itself if you looked at the right angles. He drove to Riverside Park that evening, after dark, and stood in front of the memorial for 20 minutes. It was granite, dark, gray, and solid, the names cut clean and deep in the stone. A spotlight on a short post illuminated the face of it from below. There were silk poppies and a metal ring at the base, and a small flag that had gone stiff in the cold. Donovan read the names. He read them all. He found James Aldridge near the bottom of the Vietnam section. Born 1947, died 1969, 22 years old. Kodiak sat beside him on the concrete pad, pressed against his left leg, and neither of them moved for a long time. The rain had stopped. The park was empty, the paths dark between the lampposts, the river audible somewhere south in the darkness. Behind them, perhaps a quarter-mile away, was the east section of the park, and in the east section was the open ground that Meridian Holdings had placed a commercial variance on. At the boundary of that section, near a lamppost at the park's edge, a car was parked with its lights off. It had not been there when he arrived. Kodiak saw it first. A slight shift in posture, the ears angling forward, the weight transferring to his front feet. Donovan looked without turning his body toward it, scanning peripherally. The car was dark, a sedan, possibly black or dark blue, and there was a figure in the driver's seat, and the figure was watching the memorial. Donovan stood where he was for another 3 minutes, then walked back the way he had come, without looking directly at the vehicle. He noted the make, the approximate model, the partial plate number visible in the lamppost light. He filed it with the same internal precision he filed everything. He called Harold from the inn that night. "Dark sedan," he said, and gave the partial plate. Harold was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like it could be Voss's car. He drives a dark Chevy. I've seen it outside the post building before." "Just watching," Donovan said. "He did the same thing when Robert filed the records request. Robert saw a car parked outside his house 3 nights running. He couldn't prove anything. Donovan said, 'I'll be here in the morning.' He set his phone on the nightstand and lay on the inn bed with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling. Kodiak had claimed the foot of the bed with the quiet certainty of a dog who knows which side of the transaction he is on. His warmth, a steady, familiar weight across Donovan's ankles. The thing pressing against the inside of Donovan's sternum was not strategy. He was good at strategy, could do strategy in his sleep, had done it under worse conditions than a small-town veteran's memorial dispute. The problem was the granite with the 43 names on it, and specifically one name near the bottom, and the image of Harold Dempsey standing at a dead microphone with his hands folded and his chin level and his eyes on the crowd. The problem was his grandfather sitting in a Legion post on the first Monday of the month with a coffee cake from the bakery on 5th Street, proud of a grandson he talked about, and who had not come back to this town in the 7 years since the old man died. He had left. He was good at leaving. He had left every place that had tried to hold him, and he had called it duty, and called it the mission, and called it the nature of a military life, which was all true and not the whole truth. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Kodiak's breathing slowed toward sleep. In the morning, Donovan was at Patrice's Cafe by 7 with a legal pad. He spent 2 hours working through what he knew and what he needed to know, methodical in the way that made him useful in environments where information was the only weapon that actually worked. He made 3 calls, one to a friend at the Marine Corps Legal Assistance Office, one to a former colleague now in civic law in the state capitol, and one to the State Veterans Affairs Office, which opened at 8:30. The public affairs line was answered by a woman named Cheryl who was initially cautious, and then, when Donovan explained what he was asking about and why, became noticeably less cautious. The 1970 ordinance had a provision Vera's research had flagged but not fully explored. A veterans organization with active membership could petition the State Veterans Affairs Office directly for a review of any municipal action affecting a registered veterans memorial site, and that petition, if filed within 30 days of a public notice of the proposed action, triggered a mandatory hold on the municipal action pending state review. The public notice of the Riverside Park commercial variance had been filed on October 29th. 30 days from October 29th was November 28th. Donovan wrote the date on his legal pad and drew a box around it. Cecily Marsh published the details of Voss's financial interest in Meridian Holdings the day after the Legion meeting, a 1,400-word piece on the front page of the Carlisle Bend Courier, accompanied by a scanned copy of the county assessor's document Vera had obtained. By Friday morning, the piece had spread through the town. By Friday afternoon, the state's regional news service had picked it up in abbreviated form. Donovan had provided Cecily with the additional context about the variance filing procedure and the 30-day petition window, and she had understood immediately what that meant for the story's timeline. Derek Voss did not attend the council's Thursday committee session. His office issued a brief statement through the city clerk's office, indicating he was reviewing the matters raised and would have a response in due course. Donovan read the statement once and set it aside. He spent the intervening days in a rhythm that settled around him, with a naturalness he did not analyze. Mornings at Patrice's Cafe, working through documents with the working group. Afternoons helping Robert Achebe, who was having a difficult week with his knee with errands that needed doing before the cold deepened. Evenings at the Legion Post, or at Harold's house on Cedar Lane, where Harold's daughter Louise had begun bringing food over on the theory that her father was too thin and that anyone sitting at his table was entitled to the benefit of that concern. Louise Dempsey was 55, a retired teacher, direct and practical. She had her father's jaw and her father's eyes and moved through rooms with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to managing other people's crises. She regarded Donovan initially with the careful assessment of a woman who has watched her father be disappointed by people who seemed reliable. She did not say much the first 2 evenings, but she watched him, and on the 3rd evening she set a plate of food in front of him and said, "He hasn't slept this well in months." Donovan looked at Harold, who was reading a document at the kitchen table. "The situation's moving forward," Donovan said. "That helps." "That's not why," Louise said, and went back to the kitchen without elaborating. Kodiak had taken to Harold Dempsey with the steady, undramatic loyalty that was harder to earn from a trained working dog than most people understood. He rested beside Harold's chair in the evenings, close enough to be felt, and Harold's hand would find the dog's head in the automatic way of people accustomed to comfort from warm and uncomplicated living things, and neither of them seemed to notice they were doing it. The petition to the State Veterans Affairs Office was filed on November 22nd by American Legion Post 44, with Robert Achebe as the signatory member 6 days inside the 30-day window. Vera had spent 3 days organizing 37 pages of supporting documentation. The redacted contract response, the county assessor's records, Cecily's published piece, and a legal brief from Patrick Oller outlining the procedural irregularities in the variance application. The state office acknowledged receipt the same day and issued a preliminary hold notice to the Carlisle Bend municipal government. Donovan heard about it from Robert Achebe at 9 in the morning, standing in the parking lot of the hardware store Harold's eldest son now ran, where they had been loading bags of road salt into Robert's truck. Robert read the notification on his phone and showed it to Donovan without speaking. Donovan read it. He handed the phone back. "Good," he said. "Good." Robert looked at him. "You're not surprised." "I thought it would work. I wasn't certain." Robert tucked the phone away and looked out at the parking lot. 3 months we've been pushing on this before you got here. 3 months of walls. Donovan picked up another bag of road salt. "You were building the foundation," he said. "That's not wasted time." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Harold told me about your grandfather, Frank Marsh. I knew him a little. Not as well as Harold did." Donovan loaded the bag without responding. "He would have liked what you did at the parade," Robert said. "Standing up like that." Donovan closed the tailgate. He looked at the gray sky above the parking lot, the particular November gray of a sky that has weather somewhere inside it and hasn't decided yet. "I wasn't thinking about him," Donovan said. "Not then." "I know," Robert said. "That's the point." The town council meeting on December 9th drew a larger crowd than council meetings typically did. Derek Voss attended, which surprised some people, and sat in the council section in a dark suit with his expression composed into something that resembled neutrality, the specific composure of a man calculating exits, while trying not to appear to be calculating exits. The council voted to suspend the commercial variance application for Riverside Park pending the state review, which had been expected. What had not been expected was a second motion, introduced by a council member named Patricia Fuentes, who had been quiet until that evening, calling for the initiation of an ethics inquiry into Voss regarding his undisclosed financial interest in Meridian Holdings. The motion passed 6-2. Voss left before the meeting formally adjourned. He moved through the room with the particular speed of a man who has understood the room has shifted against him and is preserving the dignity of an orderly withdrawal. At the door, he paused once, briefly, and his eyes moved across the seated audience until they found Donovan Marsh in the 4th row, and they rested there for one flat moment. Kodiak, at Donovan's feet, did not move. His eyes followed Voss to the door and held there until the door closed, and then the dog exhaled slowly through his nose and laid his chin back down on his front paws. Donovan drove Harold home from the meeting. They did not say much on the way. The streets were dark and empty at 9:30, the storefronts closed, the old brick buildings holding the cold the way brick does, the lamplight catching the first trace of frost on the sidewalks. Harold looked out the window for most of the drive and then said, "James Aldridge had a sister named Pauline. She's still living. 78 years old up in Harmon County. She doesn't get around well anymore. I sent her a letter last month to tell her what was happening with the memorial." "What did she say?" Donovan asked. Harold was quiet for a moment. "She said she hadn't been able to visit the stone in 4 years because of her hip. She said knowing it was still there, that people were still caring about it, was the only thing she needed." Donovan drove. The heater was running low. The road through the residential streets was quiet. "That's enough," Donovan said. "Yes," Harold said. "It is." He pulled up in front of Harold's house on Cedar Lane and left the engine running while Harold gathered himself. The house had its front light on, warm and yellow against the dark, and through the living room window, Donovan could see the lamp on Harold's side table, and the bookshelves behind it, and the corner of the armchair Harold used for reading. Harold had the door open and one foot out when he stopped and turned back. "I don't know what your plans are," Harold said. "After all this settles." Donovan did not say anything. "There's a house on this street," Harold said, "2 doors down. Belonged to a family named Keene. It's been empty 2 years. The son inherited it, lives in Phoenix. He's been trying to sell it and not finding the right buyer. It needs work." Harold paused. "I could give you his number if you wanted it." Donovan looked at the house 2 doors down. Dark windows, frost on the porch rails, a for sale sign that had gone a little crooked from the weather. Kodiak had his nose to the gap at the window, reading something in the night air. "Let me think about it," Donovan said. Harold nodded once, satisfied in the way of someone who has planted something and trusts the season to do its work, and got out of the car and walked up his front path. He called the number the following morning. The house on Cedar Lane needed a new roof, new plumbing on the second floor, and foundation work that a contractor estimated would take 4 months. The kitchen had original woodwork from 1948 that was intact and needed only refinishing. The floors were white oak under 30 years of carpet, solid as the day they were laid. The lot backed up to a stand of old oaks that had dropped their leaves and stood bare and patient against the gray December sky. And when Donovan walked the backyard with Kodiak the first morning he went to look at it properly, the dog moved through the space with a slow and purposeful attention, nose low, quartering the ground, and at the eastern edge where the oaks began, he sat and looked back at Donovan. He did not move until Donovan walked over and stood beside him and looked in the same direction, through the bare oaks and across the frost-pale ground, toward a line of houses and chimneys and the pale sky above Carlisle Bend. Donovan stood there for a long time. The state ethics inquiry into Derek Voss concluded in February with a finding of failure to disclose. Voss resigned from the town council on February 21st. The commercial variance application for Riverside Park was formally withdrawn the same week. The Veterans Memorial remained where it had been for 54 years, on its concrete pad in the east section of the park, the names cut clean and deep in the granite, lit from below by a spotlight that the American Legion, Post 44, upgraded in early March to a fixture that would last another 20 years. By the time the frost began to loosen from the ground on Cedar Lane, the foundation work was complete, and the plumbing was done, and the roof was on. A crew of men and women Donovan had come to know over the winter had helped with the work on the most recent Saturdays, arriving with tools and opinions and containers of food that constituted their commentary on the project. Robert Achebe supervised the floor refinishing with the patience of a man for whom a job done twice is a job not done once. Louise found replacement hardware for the kitchen cabinets that matched the originals exactly, presenting it to Donovan as information rather than a favor. Thomas Boyle refinished the staircase banister over 3 consecutive weekends and accepted no payment for it, explaining that a man with one arm has limited ways to say what he means, and this was one of them. On the first Saturday in April, Harold Dempsey brought a coffee cake from the bakery on 5th Street. He set it on the counter in Donovan's kitchen, which had been cleaned and painted, and was now in the process of becoming the kind of kitchen that accumulates use and history. And he looked at the room for a moment with an expression Donovan could not entirely read. "Frank used to buy these," Harold said, and his voice was measured with care. "I know," Donovan said. Harold set his hand on the counter briefly, a small and private gesture, and then turned away and went to the back door and opened it and looked out at the oaks, which were fully leafed now, the new green vivid in the April morning light. Kodiak was already outside. He had gone out when Donovan opened the door for the morning, and had gone directly to his spot at the eastern edge of the lot under the oaks, where he sat in the long morning light with his amber eyes on whatever horizon a dog finds worth watching. Louise was in the yard already, having come through the side gate with a trowel and a flat of seedlings she had decided were going in the front border whether Donovan had an opinion on the matter or not. Robert Achebe sat in one of the two Adirondack chairs that had appeared on the back porch without explanation at the end of February, his coffee cup in both hands. Thomas Boyle was examining the oak tree nearest the fence with the attentiveness of a man deciding if it needed anything, which was how Thomas Boyle examined most things. The morning was quiet in the particular way of April mornings in the upper Midwest, the air still cool but with warmth already in the quality of the light, the kind of morning that has shed something heavy and not yet picked anything new up. Harold turned from the back door and looked at Donovan. He would have been glad, Harold said, meaning Frank Marsh, meaning this house, meaning all of it. Donovan looked at the kitchen. He looked at Kodiak in the yard, and the oaks beyond him, and Robert in his chair, and Thomas at his tree, and Louise on her knees in the border with her trowel. The pressure in his chest, which he had been managing for years, which he had learned to store and label and keep in its designated place, had been doing something different for months that he had not quite let himself name. He named it now. It was not relief. It was not closure. It was something simpler and older than either of those, a kind of gravity that pulls a person toward a particular place and a particular people and holds them there, and the holding is not constraint but ballast, and you spend years calling it a limitation before you understand it is the thing keeping you upright. He looked out at his yard, at his dog, at the people who had arrived on his Saturdays without being asked, and stayed without being invited to leave. Finally, home. If you are carrying something heavy right now, something you have been calling duty or necessity when perhaps its truest name is fear, may this story find you and hold you for a moment. May the names on the stones in your own life be protected and remembered. May the dog at your side know goodness when it stands before him. May the people who belong to you find you wherever you have gone and bring a coffee cake and stand in your yard on a Saturday morning in April. And may God bless you, protect your family, and keep the door of your own coming home open for exactly as long as you need it.